Hey guys, we want to talk a little today about the WhatsApp message we shared. Some people have pointed out that it's old and that it might seem like we're going over old ground. But in a case like this, it's essential that we revisit earlier details. Only by going back and re-examining what we already know can we understand how those earlier clues fit into the bigger picture. We're not just rehashing things for the sake of it, we're setting a foundation. And as we go through the rest of this talk, we'll explain why this matters more than ever. The first reason we looked at the WhatsApp message again was that we managed to find it. For a while, we thought the TikTok account it was on had been taken down or deleted. The first thing we wanted to do was try and work out what had been scribbled out from the message, as we remembered it from a long time ago. Back then, we initially thought the missing words could be Haji or Rocky. After a good few hours of work, assessing character shapes that hadn't been scribbled over and doing font matching, we deduced with about 95% certainty that the name mentioned 3 times after the first squiggle was Nikki. We've already covered this in other posts and videos, so check those out if you want the full breakdown of how we got to that conclusion. Another reason we decided to show the message again was that while some people had already seen it a long time ago, others were asking to see it again, and some hadn't even come across it at all. We also feel that this message is particularly relevant right now, and we're going to break down why that is in this video. First, let's talk about the timing of the TikTok post itself. We've linked it in the original video, and we'll include it again in this one's description. If we look at the account that posted it, it's clear from the comments that the account looked newly created, seemingly just to upload these screenshots. It only has 2 posts, both relating to this message. When this TikTok account first posted the message, things were moving very quickly in the search for Jay. And something to keep in mind here. Despite being Jay's best friend, Brad had been more or less silent since Jay went missing. On June 28th, Brad's interview with Isla Tranqueir aired. These screenshots were uploaded to TikTok the very next day, June 29th. And we think it's important to note, there's no way to backdate TikTok posts, so that date can't be faked. The post went up on the 29th. And that timing really does matter. We're sure everyone's familiar with the interview that Brad gave to Isla. We don't recall any mention of him being with others that morning. And to us, that would have been an important thing to highlight, especially when your best friend has gone missing. So going back to why dates are important, in that WhatsApp message, which was sent only 12 days after Jay went missing, we can see 2 photos. The first appears to be a photo of Jay with Ayub Kasim, and the second, a photo that has now become infamous in this case, a photo of what is alleged to be Jay Slater in the back of a car, with a message about a stolen watch. We've just done some deep research using AI into the dates surrounding the stolen watch. The earliest official media report on the subject came shortly after. On June 29, 2024, the UK press, including the Daily Express, ran a story describing a huge new lead in Jay's case. A friend of Jay Slater's has told police in Tenerife that the theft of a Rolex watch led to the teenager's disappearance. But there were earlier references to a stolen watch on social media, although we can't date how much earlier with any certainty. What's very interesting to note, though, is that these early mentions seem to coincide with Mark Williams Thomas getting involved. He was in contact with the family by the 23rd of June, made contact with Debbie by the 24th, and was in Tenerife by the 25th to 26th, speaking to Debbie and taking statements from Jay's friends. If we for a minute look at a couple of other dates, those of Debbie's TV appearances, we get more context. She arrived in Tenerife on the 18th of June, and that same day made her first TV appearance from the island, which predates any indication that Mark Williams Thomas would be involved. In that first TV appearance in Tenerife, we can see and hear very clearly that Debbie strongly believes Jay has been kidnapped. She makes direct pleas to let him go, which shows where her mindset was at that point, early in the timeline and long before any narrative about watches or party fallouts had really taken hold in the mainstream or social media. The following day, on the 19th of June, she gave a full interview with Rachel Hargreaves. In that interview, the pleas to the kidnappers weren't quite as strong, not as emotionally charged as the first appearance. But there were still definite signs that she believed this was a kidnapping. The language, the worry, the undertones. It was clear she thought someone had taken Jay and was holding him somewhere. This was clearly the sentiment and the main theory surrounding Jay's disappearance at the time, that he had got into a car with two unidentified British men. There were also references, even then, to a Somali individual being potentially connected to what had happened. Whilst we now know that Ayub is believed to be British, with Somalian heritage through his parents, this wasn't something that was known in the early days. So when people first heard mention of a Somalian, it naturally enhanced the specter of kidnapping in people's minds. Not because there was any direct evidence of that, but because of how the word Somalian lands in a media context. For years, we've all been exposed to stories about Somali pirates kidnapping Westerners for ransom. That narrative has been repeated so often that it becomes a mental shortcut. So just hearing Somalian in the middle of a developing missing persons case was enough to stir very specific fears and assumptions, even without real facts behind it. And it wasn't just Debbie expressing that belief early on. Yes, Lucy Law, Jay Slater's close friend and the last person to speak with him, also publicly shared her belief that he may have been taken. In an interview with Mail Online, Lucy said, "It's been 3 days now since he was last seen, and the more time goes on, the more I'm sure he has been taken. At first I wasn't so sure, but now I'm convinced." That quote was reported by LBC on June 20th, 2024. So by that point, just days after Jay vanished, both Debbie and Lucy were clearly leaning toward the idea that Jay hadn't just wandered off, that something or someone was stopping him from coming home. Then the narrative began to shift. Whilst the search continued over the following week, and it looked like former Met detective Mark Williams Thomas was getting involved, we began to see the narrative shift. Within days of Mark stepping in, the alleged watch theft and its potential role in Jay's disappearance came to light. Was this purely down to his investigative ability? In some ways, we think so. We believe that because he not only uncovered Ayub Qasim's identity, but also confirmed that Ayub had been previously known to Jay, Brad, and others in their circle. It made the idea of a random kidnapping feel far less likely. Knowing that Ayub wasn't a stranger changed the tone. It changed the context. And it likely changed the focus of the investigation behind the scenes, too. When we piece all of this together, especially with Brad's interview going out on June 28th, and then the WhatsApp message that was allegedly sent to Debbie just a few days after Jay vanished, things start to line up in a very particular way. That WhatsApp message, which we've examined in detail, clearly appears to give Brad an alibi. It places him back in Los Cristianos, and importantly, not alone. He's with two previously unnamed individuals. That alone was a significant detail, particularly given how silent Brad had been up to that point. Then, layered over that, we have what's said to be proof of the alleged watch theft, by way of a Snapchat image. An image that supposedly shows Jay in the back of a car with very suspicious and suggestive wording overlaid. That photo has become infamous in its own right. And when we begin to connect it with the WhatsApp message and the timing of Brad's public reappearance, a narrative starts to take shape. One that feels curated, almost as if things were being positioned or justified after the fact. It's also important to flag that this photo of Jay was allegedly sent via Snapchat to his friends back home. Now this is where things get really questionable, because that same WhatsApp message also claims that Jay sent the image to them via Snapchat. So if Brad is supposedly with two anonymous people, people who, according to the message, he met on the flight and became close to, why would those people be in the same Snapchat groups as Jay's friends back home? The message doesn't frame them as part of Jay's original circle. It doesn't say mutual friends or people we already knew. It says, "I was on the flight with them and became close to them." That language implies they were strangers when the trip began, not part of the home crew. So how and why would they be in a position to receive or forward that image through Snapchat? That's a detail that often gets overlooked, but it cuts straight to the heart of that message's credibility and the dynamics it presents. As far as we know, no version of this photo has ever been seen publicly outside of what was taken directly from this WhatsApp message and later uploaded to TikTok. And here's the crucial part. We also don't know if Debbie herself has ever actually seen the original Snapchat photo, or whether she's referencing it purely based on what was shown in that WhatsApp message. That distinction matters massively, Because if the photo wasn't seen by Debbie directly, and she's basing her understanding purely on what was relayed through that WhatsApp message, then everything hinges on the authenticity and intention behind that message. And if, as we suspect, the real purpose of that WhatsApp was to do two things. First, to craft Brad an alibi by placing him somewhere and with specific people. And second, to shift the narrative away from a kidnapping and toward an alleged watch theft. Then that message becomes even more central to how this story was shaped and possibly manipulated in the days that followed Jay's disappearance. Now, some have speculated that this message might have just come from trolls, random people online looking to stir up distress or mislead Debbie. And to be fair, we do know that happened early on in the case. There were fake accounts, cruel messages, and people inserting themselves for clout or chaos. But here's why we don't believe that explanation fits this case. Ayub Qasim's identity wasn't public knowledge when this message was first posted. His name was only hinted at around July 3rd, and fully confirmed in the press by July 4th. And we have to remember who revealed that identity. Yes, it was Mark Williams Thomas. So how could random trolls on the internet, before July 3rd, have had access to a photo of Jay and Ayub together in Tenerife? Insider-level knowledge that Ayub allegedly had a stutter? The motivation and means to write a WhatsApp message, referencing all of that before any of it came out publicly? Because let's not forget, this WhatsApp message was screenshotted and posted to TikTok on June 29th. That's a full 5 days before Ayub's identity was mentioned by name in mainstream media. That's not trolling. That's not guesswork. That's information someone close to the situation had access to. If anything, it feels far more like someone trying to control a narrative than someone stirring chaos for sport. And that brings us to another critical point, the photo itself, the image of Jay in the back of a car. There are subtle but important clues in that photo that allow us to reasonably confirm the car Jay was in is the same Cupra Leon estate that Ayub had rented during his time in Tenerife. These specific visual details didn't surface until Ayub began doing his first live streams. That's when we started seeing visual cues, small flashes, interior angles, lighting, that helped us tie things together. One of the most obvious indicators? The blue light reflected in Jay's sunglasses in the photo. At first, some thought it could be police or marine lighting because of the color. But when compared with footage Ayub shared, particularly the clip of Rocky asleep in the car, it became clear that the Cupra Leon estate features built-in ambient lighting along the dash and door panels. That ambient lighting can change colors, but what we saw in Ayub's video was a very specific blue hue, identical to what's reflected in Jay's lenses. It's consistent with Cupra's design and unmistakable. Then there's the shape of the rear quarter glass, the portion of the window that curves into the boot behind the passenger seat. It's not a generic feature. That curve is distinctive, and when comparing the photo of Jay to images of the Cupra Leon estate, it's a match. That window shape, that tapering angle, that back panel, it's a visual fingerprint, and it lines up exactly. So again, if this photo wasn't real or was somehow fabricated, how could a random troll on the internet get all of that detail right? How would they know to include the Cupra's unique blue ambient lighting? How would they replicate the specific window structure? How would they know to even link Jay to that particular car before the public knew Ayub's name or what vehicle he was driving? It doesn't stack up. Not for a troll, not for a random. This looks and feels like someone with real proximity to the truth, or at the very least, someone with direct access to the materials needed to construct a convincing version of it. So after the early whispers on social media about a stolen watch and the emergence of that WhatsApp message on TikTok dated June 29th, the narrative began to shift fast. What started with strong public appeals from Debbie and Lucy, both firmly leaning toward the belief that Jay had been taken, was being overtaken by a new theory. That Jay's disappearance had something to do with the theft of a Rolex watch. And once that story gained momentum, through headlines, screenshots, and online speculation, the kidnapping angle began to fade. It stopped being the dominant theory. The focus had moved on. Now, we know there's already been plenty of speculation, about whether the person in that photo was actually Jay, or whether the language in the message even sounded like something he would write, with many suggesting it may have come from someone else, possibly Ayub. So we won't go into that again here. In the weeks that followed, but before Jay's body was found, Mark continued his investigation into both Jay's friends and Ayub Qasim. After identifying Ayub, Mark stated that his inquiries uncovered connections to a wider criminal network involving drugs, violence, and theft. He didn't share all the specifics, and once Jay's body was recovered on July 15th, Mark's visible involvement in the case appeared to wind down. Throughout this case, we've witnessed a continually shifting narrative, one that bends and flexes with each new piece of media, each new account, each evolving timeline. And strangely, each shift seems to conveniently support whichever version of events is being pushed at that time. After Jay's body was found, the story began pivoting away from the watch theft altogether. Ayub himself publicly dismissed the claim, mocking the idea with lines like, "What watch? What type? What color?" waving it away as baseless trolling. But as we've already shown, the early detail in those messages and photos makes that explanation hard to accept. This wasn't random noise. It looked calculated, like narrative management, coming from someone with inside knowledge, not an outsider lobbing chaos. Now, whatever the motivation for moving away from the watch theft story, we've already pointed out that Ayub, in early live streams, categorically denied its existence. But more recently, Saul put it back in the spotlight, catching Rocky completely off guard. And in that moment, we learned Ayub allegedly knows all the details: the make, the model, the color, and even claimed to have video evidence of the incident, stored on an iPad. Now, just to be absolutely clear, we're not saying we fully believe the watch theft was the cause of Jay Slater's disappearance and tragic death. What we are saying is this: if, as it now appears, Jay and his friends had known Ayub longer and better than was initially disclosed, then Ayub, having prior knowledge of a watch theft, could have given him an opportunity to redirect attention, to steer the narrative away from a kidnapping, just as Mark Williams Thomas was getting involved. Let's finish on one consistent pattern we've seen play out again and again in this case. Whenever new information surfaces, whether it's from the media, a court document, or a live stream, the accounts, the timelines, and the witness statements seem to shift with it. It's less like a story being clarified, and more like a narrative being recalibrated. Take Lucy. In her first version, she said she went home alone after the NRG event. In a later version, she claimed she was with Brad, and that they both tried to get Jay back to his apartment. These versions directly contradict one another, and it's hard not to notice. Then there's Nero, now known as Eddie Guerrero on TikTok. His sudden appearance came shortly after a Spanish court document surfaced, one suggesting Lucy told the Guardia Civil she was with Jay in Moscow that morning. Conveniently, Nero pops up to say he left the festival with her, aligning perfectly with this newer timeline. That now makes it the third version of what Lucy did that night. If Jay's disappearance and death were truly the result of a tragic accident, something clear-cut and explainable, why do the narratives built around that explanation keep changing? Why does the supposed truth seem so slippery? It raises the speculative, but fair, question. Are we witnessing genuine confusion? Or are we seeing an orchestrated effort to steer the outcome? Thanks for watching, and as always, we look forward to hearing your thoughts and opinions in the comments below.